Good evening. This is a special report from News UK. In the past 48 hours, the political landscape of London has been shaken by a confrontation that began as an interview and ended as a crisis. Mayor Sadiq Khan and commentator Katie Hopkins clashed live on air in a debate that spiraled far beyond the studio walls. What followed was not merely an exchange of words, but a national reckoning about leadership, accountability, and trust. The incident took place during a scheduled television interview intended to discuss urban safety and policing strategy in the capital. Mayor Khan, appearing confident and measured, faced what was expected to be a critical but civil conversation. However, within minutes, the discussion turned combative. Hopkins directly challenged the mayor's record on law and order, citing rising knife crime statistics, unsolved assaults, and a perception of leniency toward repeat offenders. Her central accusation was that London had become a city that protects criminals more than citizens. Observers described a visible shift in the atmosphere inside the studio. The tone hardened, and the host struggled to regain balance. When the mayor began attributing crime levels to economic pressures and national funding cuts, Hopkins repeatedly interjected with one pointed word: accountability. That single word became the motif of the evening, echoing through social media. Within minutes of broadcast, what had been scheduled as a 30-minute interview quickly became a 20-second viral clip. By the end of the program, millions had watched and shared it across platforms, and the tone of the national conversation changed overnight. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. On platforms such as X, TikTok, and YouTube, viewers expressed outrage, disbelief, and in many cases, exhaustion with what they described as years of political deflection. For many Londoners, the exchange seemed to symbolize a wider sense of frustration, a belief that the city's leadership had lost touch with everyday realities. Within hours, hashtags including "Your Accountability Now," "Khan Under Fire," and "Younger London Leadership Crisis" began trending. Comment sections filled with competing emotions. Some condemned Hopkins for disrespecting an elected official. Others praised her for voicing long-suppressed concerns about public safety. Political analysts noted that this digital polarization mirrored a deeper division already visible in British society between those who prioritize order and those who defend inclusive governance. The broadcast became the latest flashpoint in a conversation stretching far beyond London's boundaries. As the clip spread, City Hall moved swiftly to manage the fallout. According to internal sources, communications staff worked overnight drafting statements and requesting broadcasters to remove unauthorized excerpts. The official line described Hopkins' comments as provocative and misleading, insisting that London's government remained committed to fairness and safety for all communities. However, that response struggled to find traction. By morning, major outlets including the BBC, Sky News, and Reuters UK had covered the controversy. Headlines described it as a political car crash, while others framed it as a rare moment of unfiltered truth. Either way, the story refused to disappear. Inside City Hall, advisors reportedly warned that continued silence could appear as weakness. Yet the mayor himself chose restraint, declining immediate interviews and focusing instead on routine duties. To some, this showed dignity. To others, avoidance. In the information age, perception often travels faster than fact. By dawn, the debate had left the screen and entered the streets. Outside City Hall, small groups of protesters gathered carrying signs reading "Take Back Our City" and "Khan Failed London." These were not organized party activists, but a cross-section of ordinary residence workers, pensioners, students voicing disillusionment with rising costs, safety fears, and mistrust in institutions. Police maintained a calm but visible presence as the crowd grew. Journalists on the ground described a mood that was angry yet controlled, emotional yet purposeful. Many demonstrators stressed they were not anti-immigrant or anti-progressive, but anti-complacency. Their grievance, they said, was not about ideology but about effectiveness. At the same time, counter-voices online urged moderation, warning that anger could easily be weaponized. The scene in London reflected a national truth that faith in leadership, once lost, is rarely recovered quickly. Inside Westminster, the confrontation triggered concern across the political spectrum. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reportedly asked advisors for a security and stability briefing, an unusual step in response to a media incident. Within the Labour Party, senior figures began private discussions about the damage to the party's image in the capital. Several MPs expressed support for the mayor, while others worried he had become, as one insider phrased it, a liability we can't afford, the Conservative. Opposition seized the opportunity. Geert, Tice and Nigel Farage both released statements calling the clash a turning point for British politics. They framed the incident as evidence of a widening gap between the ruling class and ordinary citizens. For Labour strategists, the fear was strategic as much as reputational. Losing London, the party's symbolic and electoral stronghold, would have far-reaching consequences ahead of future national elections. As the story matured, new revelations added complexity. Reports emerged suggesting that portions of the televised exchange had been clipped and redistributed with edited captions, amplifying certain moments and omitting context. The mayor's office accused media outlets of distorting the interview. Broadcasters denied bias, citing fair use standards. The dispute reignited an ongoing debate about journalistic responsibility in the digital age. Katie Hopkins, meanwhile, used her social platforms to reinforce her narrative. In one post, she wrote, "The mayor has failed this city. Londoners deserve better than excuses." The message resonated with a growing audience beyond traditional political lines. Commentators noted that Hopkins, often dismissed as a provocateur, had managed to channel public frustration into a unifying sentiment that accountability matters more than affiliation. International coverage followed. Foreign outlets from the United States, Europe, and the Middle East framed the confrontation as a reflection of Britain's internal strain, a tension between free speech, populism, and political correctness. Within days, investigative journalists began tracing the origins of the confrontation itself. Anonymous sources hinted that the interview might not have been spontaneous. Leaked communications suggested coordination between certain media figures and political donors aiming to stage a high-impact moment that could undermine the mayor's credibility. If true, that would transform the story from a verbal clash into a case study of political orchestration. However, none of these allegations have been formally verified, and both Hopkins and the media outlet involved have denied any collaboration beyond routine editorial planning. Still, the perception of manipulation fed a new narrative that modern politics is increasingly fought not through policy, but through spectacle, away from headlines. Those close to the mayor described a period of intense pressure. Staff working in City Hall reportedly endured long hours amid public scrutiny and media stakeouts. According to one aide, the hardest part wasn't the criticism, it was the speed. There was no time to breathe. Friends said Sadiq Khan felt personally wounded by what he perceived as an orchestrated attempt to discredit his record. He maintained that his administration had prioritized safety and inclusion, citing new community policing initiatives and investment in youth programs. But in politics, perception often outweighs policy outcomes. Every defense he offered was dissected online, reduced to sound bites or memes. Political psychologists later described the episode as a textbook example of viral humiliation when a moment of weakness becomes an identity in the public mind, regardless of subsequent clarification. Beyond personal reputations, the controversy raised deeper questions about democracy in the digital era. How can leaders communicate effectively in an environment where outrage spreads faster than context? And what happens when truth itself becomes subjective, shaped by algorithms rather than evidence? Analysts from the London School of Economics argued that the Khan-Hopkins incident exposed the fragility of political authority in a network society. They noted that both individuals, despite opposite ideologies, became symbols in a broader struggle over narrative control. Hopkins represented the populist demand for blunt truth-telling. Khan embodied institutional restraint. The collision between those two forces created an emotional shockwave far greater than the interview itself. As public unrest grew, Downing Street faced a dilemma: intervene or remain neutral. Officials eventually issued a short statement emphasizing confidence in London's democratic institutions and policing framework. The phrasing was deliberately neutral, avoiding criticism of either side. Yet, behind closed doors, ministers reportedly worried that sustained protests could destabilize confidence in metropolitan governance. Within Parliament, a small cross-party committee called for a review of political communication standards in public broadcasting. Their goal was to establish clearer boundaries for confrontational interviews to prevent journalism from turning into performance. The move signaled recognition that Britain's political discourse may have reached a breaking point between free expression and responsible debate. Across London, the emotional impact of the incident lingered. In cafes, buses, and offices, the conversation continued. Who was right? Who crossed the line? For some, the episode validated long-standing fears about declining safety. For others, it revealed how easily complex issues could be oversimplified into viral outrage. Sociologists describe the phenomenon as a mirror moment, a time when a city sees its own reflection. Both proud and fractured, London, diverse and resilient, became a stage where frustration met fatigue. The clash between the mayor and his critics symbolized not just political disagreement, but a deeper question of belonging. What kind of city does London want to be? In the days that followed, new layers emerged. A whistleblower alleged that City Hall had instructed social platforms to remove segments of the interview under copyright claims. The mayor's office denied censorship, stating that it had acted within media rights protocols. Still, the allegation intensified accusations of suppression. Headlines such as "Censorship at City Hall" and "Mayor in Meltdown" dominated morning papers. For the opposition, the narrative was irresistible. They framed the removal request as proof that the administration feared transparency. For Khan's defenders, it was evidence of a digital environment where misinformation spreads unchecked. Both interpretations reflected the same truth: public trust had eroded, and neither side could easily rebuild it. By the end of the week, the story had crossed borders. American and European commentators drew parallels between London's turmoil and wider Western trends: rising populism, social media politics, and disillusionment with traditional elites. Former U.S. President Donald Trump even reposted one clip, calling Hopkins a brave voice in a coward's world, while others in Washington and Brussels urged restraint and dialogue. In Canada and Australia, editorial boards discussed the constitutional implications of political media ambushes. For the British government, this international attention was both flattering and alarming. It showed that Britain's internal debates still carried global weight, but also that domestic tensions could quickly become global spectacles. After nearly a week of silence, Sadiq Khan appeared outside City Hall to deliver a brief, unscripted statement. His tone was calm but firm. This was never about one interview, he said. It was about truth, about the challenges of governing a city as diverse and demanding as London. He condemned what he described as a politics of provocation and appealed for unity. However, his words divided opinion once more. Supporters praised his composure. Critics dismissed it as defensiveness. Within hours, edited clips of the speech circulated with contrasting captions, one reading, "Khan fights back," another, "Khan blames Britain." In the digital age, even sincerity struggles to survive uncut. By the second week, polls indicated a sharp decline in the mayor's approval ratings, the lowest since his first term in office. Political analysts warned that the episode could shape not only London's next election, but also the tone of national politics for years. The key lesson, they argued, lay not in who won the debate, but in how easily discourse can shift from policy to personality, from governance to spectacle. Professor Eleanor Grant of King's College London summarized it succinctly: when leadership becomes entertainment, democracy becomes fragile. Her assessment echoed across think tanks and editorial columns. The Khan-Hopkins encounter had become more than a headline. It was a case study in the vulnerability of public confidence. As days turned into weeks, London slowly resumed its rhythm. The protests faded, the headlines moved on, yet the underlying unease remained. City Hall launched new community safety initiatives, and the mayor met with local leaders to reaffirm trust. Hopkins continued her commentary, gaining both critics and admirers. The political world had changed: more cautious, more reactive, more aware of how a few minutes on live television could rewrite reputations overnight. Tonight, Britain is left with questions that transcend party lines. Can leadership survive in an age of viral judgment? Can accountability coexist with empathy? And can truth still cut through the noise of spectacle? The confrontation between Sadiq Khan and Katie Hopkins may fade from headlines, but its implications will linger, a reminder that democracy is not only about power, but perception. In the end, this was never just a clash of personalities. It was a mirror held up to a nation, revealing the fragile balance between criticism and respect, outrage and reason, freedom and responsibility.